What I'm going to do though is when I start the video, if you would just introduce yourself.
Okay.
Because I don't ever record the beginnings of the meetings, so just whatever you want, however you want to introduce yourself.
Okay.
But thank you, Jared, for coming to speak to
Yeah,
us today.
most
Thank you,
definitely.
everyone, for coming out. And we'll start in prayer. God, thank you so much for this wonderful room that we have use of, and just thank you for Jared sharing his knowledge with us this evening. I thank you for the people coming to listen, and we just pray blessings over everything. And God, we just thank you. We are so blessed, and we just ask that you would give us the information that you want us to hear, and use Jared as your instrument. And we pray blessings over him, blessings on our travels back home, and thanks to God in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right,
Thank you.
Hand over to you and then just give me time to
Okay. Do you want me to talk into this, or you guys, should I just talk with no mic?
whichever you're more comfortable with.
No mic sounds good to me. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. My name is Jared Pitts, and just preface this by saying, I'm not a doctor, so don't take anything of what I say as advice or recommendations. But a little bit of my story. When I was, like 9 years old, I had some issues with my neck. We went in, got a X-ray, and the first chiropractor, praise the Lord, my parents, took me to a chiropractor. She looked at my X-ray and said, I have no idea what's going on. I know something's wrong, but I don't know what to say. So she referred us to someone else, and that guy said, your neck is completely opposite of what it should be. And then on top of that, I had scoliosis. And so anyway, started out life very early. My mom has a metal rod in her back, surgically implanted, because she had scoliosis. And so praise the Lord, I did not have to experience that. Went to a chiropractor like 3 or 4 times a week for a long time. And they were able to correct everything. And so, anyway, that kind of got me started. My mom always thought I would grow up to be a chiropractor, and that did not happen. But I was very interested in health very quickly, just because it's not fun to be sick. And so I tried everything and got into everything, essential oils, this, and vegetarian here, and anyway, all that to say, I feel like there is so much disinformation out there. It's very easy to get bad information, and so what I like to do with Missouri Health Coach when I work with people is, to help them come up with like a personalized plan, because everyone's different, everyone's unique, but the basic biology and physiology is the same, right? Because we're all created. I believe we're created by a creator, our God. And so there is order in what he made. And so I'm going to start off with this little quote: over the oxygen supply of the body, carbon dioxide spreads its protecting wings. And that's from Friedrich Nietzsche, a Swiss physiologist. And so carbon dioxide, from the beginning, like when we're in whatever 3rd grade, and they tell you oh, plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen, and we breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. It's this incredibly simplistic idea, but it puts something in our brains that makes us think that CO2 is just this waste product, right? But it's actually an incredibly important part in our metabolism. And so one of my favorite topics, and you'll see why as we go through here. And if you have questions while I'm presenting, please ask questions, because I taught for 10 years, and that's kind of my format. I like to teach. So another thing that really influences what I do is God. And so these are a couple of my favorite verses. It's amazing reading through the Bible and seeing how integrated the physical and the spiritual and the mental, it's all one, right? We are not, modern medicine likes to chop everything up, and you go to the endocrinologist and the cardiologist, and but everything is fully integrated, like everything's connected, and that goes for our spiritual and mental and physical self, right? And so anyway, whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. It speaks for itself, right? We can glorify God in what we eat, what we put into our bodies, how we live. And then, do you not know that your body is a sanctuary of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and that you are not your own, for you are bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body. So, all through history, right, the Gnostics wanted to say, reject the physical, but that is not what the Word says, right? God made the physical world, and it is good, he said. And so we are to be good stewards. And so that's what I like helping people do. This is my family. We have 6 kiddos. That's my second born, and so you can see me manhandling him for a picture. Because that's what, I'm a second born, so I can say that. So we have a little farm down in Fredericktown near Farmington, Missouri. And these are our 2 little bull calves that were born this winter, a couple months ago. We have sheep, so you can see all the little babies nursing. Kind of a dark picture, but this is what we like to do. Just a little bit about me. That's our dog. We went sledding and she followed us. This is our neighbor's land, and so she got tied up. And this is my animal lover, my second born daughter. The other one was my second born son. Anyway, she is crazy about animals, and I don't think the animals like it sometimes. I taught chemistry for a while, and so it's been really helpful in understanding how everything works in the body and in the world around me. And so if you've never taken just like a mini 101 course on the periodic table, if you do that, the whole world makes so much more sense. So anyway, we might come back and take a look at this as we're going through here. Okay, so we're talking about carbon dioxide, the thing that everyone wants to demonize, right? It's going to warm up the planet and melt all the ice caps and destroy the world, right? Well, I beg to differ. What is the average body temperature supposed to be? Does anyone know? What do they say it's supposed to be? 98.6, right? We're told that from, first grade, right? 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? But what is the average body temperature these days, right? Because normal and optimal, they're different, right? Especially in modern day America. Optimal is very different than normal. Current average body temperature of an American human is 97.8 degrees. Doesn't seem like a huge difference, but we are on a downward trend. And there's a reason for that. Okay? So here's a research article. Decreasing human body temperature in the United States since the Industrial Revolution. Those are the key words there. Why did it start? Why did we start the downward trend when, industry exploded? Why is that? So let's just read a little quote here. The substantive and continuing shift in body temperature, a marker for metabolic rate, that's the key, provides a framework for understanding changes in human health and longevity over 157 years. So this is a big old study that took thousands upon thousands of people's temperatures to find out that we are on this downward trend that started at the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so why is that? Why are we on this downward trend? So this comes back to CO2, okay? So if the world's supposed to be warming with CO2, why are our bodies cooling? Well, it's because we're producing less CO2. This comes into it. What happens between us breathing in and breathing out? Where does the CO2 come from? Okay, that's what we're going to talk about. And so this is kind of like a 201 class. This is a little bit intense. I hope you guys appreciate it, and if you have questions, please stop me. Before we start discussing this, which is, right, I said metabolic rate, that's the key in that study. before we start discussing metabolism and its role in CO2 in our bodies, I have a question. So I'm starting a business, and I've got two guys that have put in an application, okay? So it's a lawn mowing business, and every lawn that the guy on the right mows, I make on average $30 to $38. Whereas the guy on the left, every lawn he mows for me, I make about -4 because he's just incredibly slow and messes things up and all that, okay? I don't know. I'm trying to decide. This is totally not related to what I'm talking about here, but who should I hire? Obviously the guy on the left, all right? All right, terrible little thing we're doing here, but we'll bring it back to it. Okay. So remember that, okay? So you had one with 30 to 38, so net positive, and then we got -4, net negative, okay? So we all know oxygen is important. We're all told that, right? We breathe it in. Why, though? What happens in our body, okay? What is the oxygen actually doing? So it's an integral part of creating energy, okay? We saw in that study that body temperature is something that shows us our metabolic rate. What is creating energy? It is our metabolism, okay? And so oxygen is important because it's integral in creating energy. And we'll get into this, but it is what we call the terminal electron energy acceptor, okay? It receives an electron at the end of our metabolism, okay? And we're going to get into that, but that's just something we're going to keep in mind as we go, okay? So, what are some ways that we create energy? Like we just said, we breathe oxygen in. This is very important in our metabolism. And so we have 4 different ways we're going to talk about here. One's called glycolysis, and you can either have aerobic or anaerobic glycolysis. Then you have what's called the Krebs cycle. Has anyone heard of the Krebs cycle before? Okay, so the Krebs cycle, there's a couple of different names for it. Citric acid cycle, TCA cycle, and then it's even known as the St. George Krebs cycle. Albert St. George is an incredible scientist. If you haven't read some of his stuff, I'd advise you to go and read some of it. But he discovered parts of the Krebs cycle, and so some people will call the Krebs cycle St. George Krebs cycle. The electron transport chain, which is a part of what we call oxidative phosphorylation, or OXPHOS for short, okay? And then you also have beta oxidation, and this is how we create energy from fatty acids, okay? So we're going to go through some of these and why the downward trend in America of our temperatures. So, all right, so this is glycolysis. What happens when you breathe in, you take in oxygen, but you're also taking in carbon dioxide, and you're also taking in food, right? This is what we make energy from. And so glycolysis is the first step in making energy in our body. And I have on the left side the inputs, and then we have over here on the right side what you get out of it. So one glucose molecule, and you need this little thing called NAD+, okay? In order to create energy, right? When you plug in your phone into the wall, how does it get energy? What is it pulling from the wall? Electricity, okay? And electricity is what? Electrons, okay? And so when we intake food, we are actually taking the electrons, right? We're breaking it down. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens, but we're actually taking electrons. We're the same as that phone, right? Carbon and electrons. That's how we create energy. So when we have glucose go into our body, you can see over here, there's 6 carbons on this glucose molecule, and then you use up energy and you create 4 more ATPs, and then you get these things called pyruvate, okay? And those are both 3 carbon things. So you go from 6 carbons, it breaks apart into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate. And this is integral in making energy, okay? If you're not doing this, you're dying, okay? This is called glycolysis, and you can see what the net output is because you created 4, but you used 2 up. You also have this NADH, and then again 2 pyruvate, okay? So we went from an NAD plus to an NADH. How does that happen? NAD plus and other molecules like it, you can think of them like a taxi cab, okay? So if you go into Chicago outside the airport and you're trying to get somewhere and there's a whole bunch of taxi cabs, but they already have people in them, are you going to get anywhere? No, you're stuck. Until the taxi cab has no one in it, then you can get in and you can go somewhere, right? So NAD plus is like a taxi cab with no one in it, okay? And so then it receives an electron, and we'll call that the passenger, and it turns into NADH, okay? And people will have a hard time creating energy when they have a ton of full taxi cabs and they're not having their electrons removed so that they can be NAD plus again and then carry more electrons, more energy, right, down the metabolic pathways. Does that make sense? And there's several electron carriers, okay? NAD plus is one of them. This is one of the types of taxi cabs that are out there. All right? Any questions about this? Makes sense? All right, so we have to make pyruvate. This is very important for energy creation. Now, we get to a fork in the road, okay? We either have oxygen present, okay, we breathe in oxygen, and pyruvate gets converted into what we call acetyl-CoA. This is a 2-carbon thing. We're always making energy with 2 carbon molecules, acetyl-CoA. Or oxygen is not present or cannot be used and gets reduced to what we call lactate. And you guys have experienced this before when you're working out, okay? So you're working out, you're feeling really good. What kind of exercise do you guys do? Lifting weights. My church right now, all the dudes are doing a 2,000 push-up challenge for March. And I overdid it like 2 days ago, and so I skipped yesterday, and we'll see if I do it today. Anyway, when you get to a certain point, you can't go any further, or it starts to what? Burn, right? Okay, so you're creating energy, your muscles are, you're expending energy, and at some point, you go from having oxygen present and in good supply, and you're converting pyruvate into acetyl-CoA, and then you use up all your oxygen. And your body has an emergency mechanism to create lactate instead of creating acetyl-CoA. This is a problem if it happens chronically. Acutely, fantastic. God created our bodies to do it so that when we run out of energy, we can go into emergency phase over here, producing lactate. But if we can't get back over to there, then we have something called, so do you guys know what else creates lactate, right? It's on your kitchen counter sometimes. I'm sure some of you guys have fermented some things, right? Lactate is just another word for lactic acid, right? So you guys are fermenting something on your counter, sauerkraut or kimchi or whatever, and it's probably some type of lactobacillus bacteria that creates energy, and a byproduct is going to be this lactic acid. It's a fermentative process. Does that make sense? Fermentation. We should not be doing fermentation inside of our bodies chronically. Acutely, fine, but we need to get back over into converting to acetyl-CoA, okay, which is oxidative, right? Fermentative, oxidative. You run out of oxygen and you start fermenting. All right. Now, here we go. With oxygen, you go through a complex called pyruvate dehydrogenase. And it's an enzyme complex that you have an input of pyruvate, right? If we go back, we add pyruvate, right? And it's going to get converted into acetyl-CoA. This is that process. With oxygen, oxygen's present, and it's going to get converted. You need oxygen for this process. You need NAD+. You need FAD. This is another electron carrier. And without having these things, what are you going to do? If you can't convert pyruvate into acetyl-CoA, what are you going to do? Convert it into lactate. All right? So, guess what? Guess what the precursor for NAD+ is? Anyone know? It's niacinamide, or niacin, B3. A lot of people have bottlenecks in their metabolic pathways, and one of them is not having enough B3. NAD+ is extremely important for creating energy, and when you do not have it, you will not have enough NAD+. All the taxi cabs will have passengers in them, and you won't be able to create energy. It's a bottleneck, right? FAD, this is called flavin adenine dinucleotide. Does flavin make anyone think of anything? Riboflavin, right? So FAD, in order to have that, if you don't have B2, are you creating acetyl-CoA? You can't, okay? You absolutely need riboflavin, which is the precursor to flavin adenine dinucleotide, to create these little taxi cabs that are running along our metabolic pathways, carrying electrons so that we can have energy. Okay? Any questions about that? Now, this is the CO2 engine right here. This is how we create CO2. And we're going to talk about why CO2 is important here in a minute. All the different things that CO2 does in our body. But if you're not doing this, you don't have CO2. Okay? You might be able to breathe some in, but this is where we get our CO2, from our metabolism. We're actually creating it, and it's not a waste product. It's not something we need to breathe out, right? All right, any questions on that? So this is the optimal situation, oxidative metabolism. In this complex, a limiting factor is also thiamine, or B1, and can also be niacinamide like we said, okay? B1, B2, B3, the majority of people are depleted in those B vitamins, and the majority of people are not creating energy optimally. All right, and that happens right here in the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. All right, what happens if you do not have oxygen? Mm-hmm.
I have a question about
Yeah.
the B vitamins.
Yes.
It's methylated B. Is that what we should be taking, or does it, can it just be the B vitamin, B6 vitamin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and how-
Yeah, so as far as B1, B2, and B3, what I can speak to what I do and why I do it, but B1, there's a lot of different B1s, a ton of different ones, and I'm not particularly trying to find a methylated version for different reasons. But like thiamine HCl, is something that I've used before. But look, there are so many studies showing high dose B1, and this is going on the internet. Turn off the video. Okay. Like with the big C word. I mean, just ridiculous. And why is that? Why? Amazing stuff. Why is that? Those are all, and I meant to say this in the beginning, all disease is an energy creation problem. That's what disease is. Your metabolism is not working correctly. And so why do this large spectrum of diseases benefit from taking high doses of B1, this water-soluble vitamin? Because you're restoring your body's ability to make energy. And I meant to say this as well, that I've been through kind of it all, right? Alternative health, allopathic health, the whole nine, and everyone focuses on B9 and B6 and B12, right? And they're not talking about B1, B2, and B3, which are the B vitamins that you need in order to create energy, right? So this is why such a broad spectrum of diseases are helped with B1.
So is there a good combination of those three Bs?
Yeah, great question.
In one?
Yeah, it is important, yeah, to get the right amount. And so with niacin B3, I take the amide version, niacin amide. A lot of people will call it non-flushing niacin. And the only reason it's non-flushing is because most people's bodies respond to other niacin analogs by like a red feeling, you know, through their whole body, a heat, like a hot flash of sorts. And that's not good, right? When you feel something like that, right? No one gets to menopause and has hot flashes and is like, something's working, you know? It's something's not working, right? Or something's happening that shouldn't be happening. You know, hot flashes are only they're normal, but they're not optimal, right? And so with niacin and a whole bunch of different analogs of B3, you get that flush. And sometimes there's also this non-flushing type of niacin where they attach a molecule to the niacin molecule. It's not niacinamide, but it's just like a slow release. So they call it non-flushing, but it's not actually non-flushing. It's just happening slowly and you're not experiencing at a fast rate, right? So anyway, I only take niacinamide, and personally, 100 to 200 milligrams a day is more than enough. And then B2 is kind of interesting because it's very difficult to get a good B2. I usually, like with my clients, I say hold off and try the B1 and B3 first because of how B2 is a yellow compound and it'll interact with light more, which means it'll degrade faster. And so a lot of people will take B2 and have bad responses, and it's not because of the B2 itself, it's because your product's old or whatever. Supplements can cause as many problems as they, help if you're not getting, if they have excipients or whatever in them, contaminants, or they're degraded. So, but yeah, I can write some of those down later if you would like. Okay, so again, without oxygen, what's happening? We have our pyruvate, and we're making a lactate in a fermentative process. And lactate is a problem because it's a poison. Okay, it was emergency. This is an emergency process, right? For an acute situation, you've run out of oxygen. But you have to go through this process called the Cori cycle to get rid of lactate, okay? So in order to regenerate NAD+, you use this lactate dehydrogenase enzyme, okay? And this is what happens. We can think of lactate as the opposite of CO2, essentially. You're either doing oxidative metabolism or fermentative. This is not the optimal situation. It's an emergency, but when acute becomes chronic, you get issues, okay? So what do we do with the lactate when we create it? Lactate's a poison. We send it to the liver in the Cori cycle. Because we created the lactate, we now have to spend the equivalent of 6 ATP to convert lactate back into glucose via a process called gluconeogenesis. And it's in the name, right? Gluco, meaning glucose, neo, meaning new, and genesis, creation, right? Our body needs glucose. The alternative health world says we don't need glucose. Our bodies, all of our cells, they're either burning glucose, glycogen, right, the carb version of fuel, or fatty acids, the fat version of fuel, one or the other at any given time. Different organs in the body want to use different fuels at different times. For example, muscles, when we are at rest, they like to burn fatty acids, okay? That's why when you get muscular, it's easier to stay muscular because you're able to burn fat. You burn a lot more fat, right? People think you have to exercise really hard in order to lose weight, but that's not necessarily the case. You're burning fat even when you're sitting, right? It just depends on how much muscle you have and if your metabolism is working, right? So our muscles utilize fat when we're just resting, But then when we start exercising, there's a couple of places that we store glycogen, which is the glucose form of fuel for our bodies. Huge storage in the liver, but we also store glycogen locally in our muscles. Because why would you need to do that? Because when you start working out, when you go for a run, when that whatever, dinosaur is chasing you down the road, you need fuel immediately, and so your muscles can access that glycogen store that's right there in the muscles. Okay? And that's why when you butcher an animal, right, you have a fermentative process that starts because the bacteria is actually eating the sugar in the muscle, right? This is how they make like aged meat. It's a fermentative process, but it's using the sugar. The bacteria it's eating up the glycogen stores from the meat, right? You don't think about meat being having sugar in it, right? Okay. So, in order to get the glucose the body needs, it has to go convert the lactate back to glucose, and it costs 6 ATP. So, do you guys remember how many did we need to make? We needed 2, and we made 2. We made 4, but right, net 2 when we did this. Then we lost 6. So if you were 2 plus, 6 negative, what's happening here? We're at a -4, okay? All right, here's my Mr. -4. All right, this is a net negative energy process that our bodies go through. There is a man named Otto Warburg. Have you guys heard of him? Otto Warburg. He's like the guy that people reference to say sugar feeds cancer. Okay, do you guys know the Warburg references? So Otto Warburg never said sugar feeds cancer if you read his stuff. What happens in cancer? Let's look. Oxygen is present or oxygen is not present. In a cell that is trying to produce energy but cannot access oxygen, even if oxygen is there, it's going to go through aerobic glycolysis is what they call it. Okay? So after glycolysis, right, you can go the oxidative way, but with cancer, your metabolism is not able to utilize the oxygen in oxidative metabolism. And so you're constantly creating lactate, converting it back to glucose, creating lactate, converting it back to glucose. And it's a net negative energy process. And so have you ever heard like people with cancer, they don't die of cancer, they die of something else, like wasting disease essentially, right? Cachexia is what they call it, right? If you've ever watched someone that's had cancer and they've died of it, you can see them waste away, right? It happens before your eyes. And it's because of this process. Their metabolism is shot and they're going through what's called aerobic glycolysis because oxygen is present, but they can't utilize it for some reason. And so they just spin in circles in aerobic glycolysis, glucose, lactate, glucose, lactate, glucose, lactate, losing energy the entire time. They take what should be an acute process and it becomes chronic, and it's what we call fermentative, okay? So lactate shoots up in the body, okay? And you're creating no energy, you're net negative. This is what cancer is. All right. What happens if you can utilize oxygen in the body? You can take that acetyl-CoA, okay? Do we remember, sorry, I know we're skipping all over the place. In pyruvate dehydrogenase, we went from pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, okay? And you're able to go into the mitochondria, it's called mitochondrial respiration, with the acetyl-CoA. Again, we saw this little guy before, NAD+, FAD. They keep showing up, right? Because all along oxidative metabolism, you have to carry these electrons all the way to the end. What did we say was the last electron acceptor? Oxygen. So you need these, and then what do we create? ATP. Again, this guy was NAD+. He's got a passenger in his little taxi cab now. FAD, FADH2, and what are we creating a ton of now? CO2, and it's not a byproduct. It's a necessary, it's the opposite of cancer, the opposite of lactate, okay? All right, Krebs cycle, okay? I know we went through that fast. A lot of these things are regenerated in this process, okay? The Krebs cycle in the mitochondria. And then you go into what's called the electron transport chain, and you can hear it in the name, right? Passing electrons down a chain. There's complex 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the electron transport chain. And this is where all your ATP is created, all right? Remember Mr. Strongman, we won't go back to him. 30 to 38, older textbooks say a higher number. They're like, it's somewhere in 34. So we're just gonna say 30 to 38 got created. And what do you end up with a ton of? Empty taxi cabs. Why? Because oxygen, the terminal electron acceptor, which if you cannot utilize, you're not going to make energy in your mitochondria. He accepted, he's regenerated FAD and NAD+, and these guys can go back and do the whole process again, right? These guys get recycled. And you also create water, okay? Any questions about that? That's the full oxidative metabolism of the body, specifically the glucose pathway. And again, if you look up the Randall cycle, it's called the glucose fatty acid cycle. Our organs, the brain, primary fuel source, glucose. The brain actually stores glycogen. That's the third place that it stores it, right? Liver, muscles, brain. And so without glycogen, we're going to see what happens. I'm not sure how long I'm running. I know I have way too much that we're going over, but the brain, right, 20% of the body's energy and its primary fuel source is glucose. What happens if you don't eat glucose, if you don't get any type of carbohydrates? Okay, what does the body do? And we looked at it in a second, but we're going to go back and see it. All right, so here's the full metabolic pathway, right? Glycolysis, and then we want to come down here into oxidative metabolism. And if we don't, then we go up here and we just go in circles doing fermentative metabolism. Okay? Spinning our wheels, you might say. So back to that question, do we want oxidative metabolism, Mr. Fantastic here, or fermentative metabolism? Right? Obviously, oxidative metabolism. All right. You also have what's called beta oxidation, and this is how you utilize fatty acids, okay? And we're going to talk about a couple of problems that you can run into just like you can on the glucose oxidative pathway. Input, fatty acids, and then what do you notice? NAD plus and FAD. So what happens if you're not getting B3 and B2? Can you go through this very well? You cannot. Beta oxidation output, once again, just like carbohydrates create acetyl-CoA, fatty acids. They create the same thing. It's acetyl-CoA. And then you have a couple of guys that are carrying electrons, right? Little taxi cabs. Okay, we went from fatty acids, which are long chains of carbon, right? Long chains of carbon. You can have short chain fatty acids too, but a lot of the time it's long chains of carbon, and they get broken down. Every time it goes through here, boom, it pops out an acetyl-CoA. 2 carbons, right? Cutting 2 carbons off, 2 carbons off, 2 carbons off. And you're just making acetyl. So you can actually create more energy if beta oxidation is working, because you've got these long chains, right? Glucose is just that little 6-carbon chain. He made 2 pyruvates, then he made some acetyl-CoA, right? Breaking down the carbon, right? Just like a fire eats up, it's burning through carbon, right? Carbon is fuel. We're burning through carbon. That's how we create energy. That's how we, that is our fuel. Okay, so beta oxidation, this is how fatty acids go through our body. Output is acetyl-CoA, NADH, okay? Acetyl-CoA then feeding into the Krebs cycle in oxidative metabolism. All right, so you remember we did the same thing with glucose, exactly the same. And then you take the acetyl-CoA and it goes into the Krebs cycle and it goes into oxidative phosphorylation and you make lots of energy and lots of CO2. And at the very end of that chain is oxygen. All right, these are the problems that you can run into with fatty acid oxidation. The majority of fatty acids inhibit pyruvate dehydrogenase. Do you guys remember what pyruvate dehydrogenase does? It takes pyruvate and converts it into acetyl-CoA, right? So that it can enter into the Krebs cycle. The majority of fatty acids inhibit that process. What happens if you stop your body from converting that pyruvate into acetyl-CoA? What's it going to go through? Aerobic glycolysis, lactate, glucose. That's what it does. What does not inhibit? What's the one that the FDA says we shouldn't eat, right? Saturated fats. That's been what the recommendations for how long, I don't know. But they tell you, high saturated fat is the cause of heart disease and blah, 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 right? Those are the ones that do not inhibit pyruvate dehydrogenase, okay? It promotes excessive glycolysis, eventually causing what do we call lactic acidosis, right? This is the big C word, right? And other issues. Industrial revolution. What was introduced to the food system? Unsaturated fatty acids, right? These unstable fatty acids, vegetable oil, safflower, cotton, sunflower, etc., that are unstable. And what do? They all inhibit our ability to create energy. What disease has shot up through the roof since the Industrial Revolution? All right? So it's a problem, and this is why it's so important to limit, seed oils and PUFA, right? Polyunsaturated fatty acids. Extremely important. This is the downward, metabolic pathway of what happens when you eat PUFA. Okay, long chain fatty acids, they do cost ATP in order to be quote unquote activated in order to enter beta oxidation. But again, if you're eating good saturated fat, that's fine because you're going to create more energy, right? But if you're eating a lot of PUFA, you're using up energy and then you're sending it into aerobic glycolysis to use up even more energy. Okay? So you can see how fast you can head downwards, right? When the acetyl-CoA goes to enter the Krebs cycle, if you don't have this guy, you have a problem because it's the first step in the Krebs cycle. Okay? It's called the citric acid cycle as well because acetyl-CoA does some fancy stuff with OAA, which creates citric acid. Okay? That's why they call it the citric acid cycle. So you create a bottleneck. So why would we have a bottleneck at the first step of the Krebs cycle? We created acetyl-CoA, regardless of how we did it, glucose, fatty acids. Why would we have a bottleneck right here? Because OAA, or oxaloacetate, oxaloacetic acid, is used in this process, gluconeogenesis. We've heard that once before, right? Your body has to have glucose. Your brain does not function without glucose. So if you do not get any carbs, what will your body do? It will go through this process, gluconeogenesis, in the liver. Okay? Using up pyruvate in order to create it. So a heavy fat diet needs to do gluconeogenesis in order to keep the brain functioning and the muscles. All right, so you also need pyruvate and CO2 to create OAA. And what is the main way to get CO2? It is that pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, right? That only happens with glucose metabolism. That's the CO2 factory right there. So when so here's the thing. People will go on keto diets and carnivore diets for good reasons. Sensitivities, what else? Insulin, right? Sensitivities to different foods, but also insulin insensitivity, right? The body gets glucose, ramps up insulin, your body's not responding to it how it should, and it's a problem, a big problem, and it'll cause problems down the road, right? And so they'll go to a keto or carnivore diet and they'll have good success, which is awesome. But what happens when you do carnivore and keto long term? And I'm not saying people haven't made it work. I know people like Sean Baker and what's his name? RFK, right? No, RFK is not trying to think of. Yeah, I was thinking of Jordan Peterson, right? And Jordan Peterson, he's obviously got a ton of health issues, right? So crazy sensitivities in that guy. But the majority of people doing carnivore keto long term will end up with this problem, and this is why. It's because, and we can walk through the process here real quick, this compound that is needed in the Krebs cycle is diverted out of the mitochondria for gluconeogenesis. It's needed for that, okay? We wanted to use it in the Krebs cycle, but because we have no glucose coming into the body on a keto diet, the body has to use it in order to create glucose. Because again, we cannot, our brain cannot function without glucose. So OAA levels in the liver, mitochondria drop significantly. Acetyl-CoA now has very little of that to react with in the Krebs cycle. Can't enter the TCA cycle, the Krebs cycle, right? And the liver mitochondria become overloaded with acetyl-CoA. They have nowhere to go for complete oxidation, okay? So it's a problem. You get bogged up with acetyl-CoA, which is the 2-carbon molecule that you should be able to create energy with, right? So what happens then? It gets diverted to what? Ketone body synthesis in the liver. That's what acetyl-CoA goes to. Why does the body enter ketosis? All right, they call it the ketogenic diet for a reason, because you're creating ketones, okay? It happens as an emergency. It's not something that is like fantastic for the body to do, right? You create these ketones, and the liver can actually not use those ketones that it's created. And so it sends them into the blood and other tissues like the brain, muscle, heart, take them up and convert them back into acetyl-CoA. And then they're able to send them through their own Krebs cycle, right? Because we're talking about the mitochondria and acetyl-CoA going into it, right? We have cells all over our body that do the same thing. But again, the liver is doing gluconeogenesis, using up all of the OAA, and then the liver can't accept acetyl-CoA into the Krebs cycle, okay? Because it has a bottleneck. So it diverts it to ketones, sends it out, and this happens, okay?
Back to the slide before that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Oops, sorry. All right. So this causes inhibition. Oops. Inhibition of glucose oxidation everywhere because of the Randle cycle, and it increases stress hormones, okay? So when your body has no glucose and no glycogen stores, right? When you eat sugar, sugar is a broad term, right? When you eat sugar, your body says, all right, we're gonna use it for energy. Okay, we have excess. Okay, store it as glycogen. That's short-term fuel. Liver, muscles, brain. And then insulin response, well, insulin happens before this, but we'll just pretend like it's just happening, and it sends it to long-term fat storage, right? Fat storage is long-term fuel, okay? In case there's a famine or whatever. But you have the inhibition of glucose oxidation everywhere if you're not getting any glucose because of stress hormones, okay? How does the body go into gluconeogenesis? If we're not getting any carbohydrates, it's going to do this. It's going to create its own glucose, okay? How does the body tell it that it's going to do that? It's from cortisol. Cortisol spikes. And that's telling the body, create glucose. We don't have any coming in. We don't have any glycogen in our liver. We don't have any short-term energy stored up. Start creating glucose. It does that with cortisol, okay? Cortisol helps our body break down our tissues, whether that's our muscles into the amino acids, or that's our fat into the fatty acids, okay? And so it creates this, what we call a feedback loop of stress. Okay, I know that's a lot, and Anyway, are there any questions about that? Does that make sense that you need oxidative metabolism, and if you're not doing that, you're not creating CO2, right? Instead, you're creating lactate. These are the two paths that you can go down in your metabolism. All right, so why is it important that we go down oxidative metabolism? Have you guys ever heard that people benefit from taking baking soda when they have the big C word? Have you guys heard that before? Why is that? When you look at these metabolic pathways, baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. When you look at how CO2 is used in the metabolism, it's an interchangeable word. CO2, bicarbonate. These are like interchangeable in the metabolic pathways. When you provide the body sodium bicarbonate and you have the big C word, you're providing the body CO2. That's exactly what you're providing it. People say, oh, it's alkalizing the body. That's not true. There's different acid, pHs all over the body, right? The stomach is crazy acid. Other places are more base, right? We know the blood is in a very, narrow pH that it has to be in order for us to be alive, right? You're not alkalizing anything by taking baking soda, but you are getting a bump in CO2, okay? So why is it important that we get CO2? Why is it important that we're going through good oxidative metabolism and creating a lot of CO2? When you have cells producing CO2, you have a chemical reaction that makes your blood more acidic. Hemoglobin responds to acidity by releasing oxygen more easily. Why do we need oxygen? Right? It's the last electron acceptor in oxidative metabolism. That's why it's called oxidative, oxygen, right? You can have oxygen all through your body, right? You could put a little, ox meter, what do they call those things, ox pulse, on your finger, and it can be 100, right? But if your hemoglobin isn't releasing that oxygen, it's pointless. Cancer is aerobic glycolysis because oxygen is present, but your body's not releasing it, okay? You can help your body release it by creating more CO2, and there's a lot of ways. I'm going to go over how you can increase CO2 in the body. But when your blood becomes a little more acidic, your hemoglobin is more apt to release that oxygen and allow your body to get back into the way it's supposed to create energy. The opposite is true. You can try it now. If you hyperventilate via heavy breathing, you'll start to feel your parts of your body go numb. Have you guys ever hyperventilated a little bit? Right? When I was a kid, I remember being extremely angry at my mom and right? And I would feel parts of my face, my hands go numb, right? I had anger issues. I'm not afraid to admit it. I'm a little 10-year-old Jared. Why is that happening? Okay? You're breathing more. You should have more oxygen. You should, right? You should be more oxygenated. No. Okay? You've lowered your CO2 by breathing heavily. Okay? Alkalizing your blood, causing your hemoglobin to hold on to oxygen more tightly, creating a hypoxic situation. So this is like a little example of how you can lower your CO2 very easily. But that's what's happening inside of your body when you're not doing oxidative metabolism, okay? You're creating a hypoxic situation. All right, so these are some really cool examples of, I like to see these where we see different animals that benefit from CO2 as well. And we see that, we see this all over the world where different animals can benefit from CO2. So a high carbon dioxide content activates the ovaries of a queen bee, increasing her fertility. Okay? We see fertility as a sign of health, right? Queen bees live many times longer than worker bees, we know this, and have mainly monounsaturated fats in their tissues. The workers regulate high CO2 levels in the queen's compartment, compensating for darkness and supporting oxidative metabolism while inhibiting lactic acid. Why do queen bees live so long? They're regulating the CO2 in her compartment, the little worker bees, right? A much higher CO2 level in her compartment than elsewhere. The naked mole rat. These guys live in little burrows. underground with very high, right? Our air, 0.038% carbon dioxide. Their burrows, 0.2 to 5% carbon dioxide. That is extremely high. Naked mole rats are studied in science because they cannot get cancer. It's almost impossible for them to give these guys cancer, naked mole rats. Okay? So a little bit on why this is. They live up to 30 years. Like for other animals, their size and that type of creature, that's crazy. 9 to 10 times longer than mice of the same size. They have extremely low inflammation, no known cancer. They live in closed burrows where CO2 ranges from 0.2 to 5. Bats, high CO2 caves in serum levels. Bats have a very high metabolic rate, yet an extremely long lifespan. There's this lie that's kind of perpetuated in allopathic medicine that it's this thing called the rate of living theory, where they say that it's kind of like this analogy of if you burn the candle really hard and bright, you're going to live less long, right? But in reality, burning the candle is an example of metabolism, right? In reality, things with a higher metabolic rate in nature tend to live longer, okay? So extremely long lifespans for their size. Many live decades. Bat caves have slightly elevated CO2, and they maintain high serum CO2 levels that protect them from ammonia toxicity, which would of course come from all the pee and stuff in the caves, right? All right, high altitude adaptation. Living at high altitudes increase retained CO2. Lower oxygen pressure displaces less CO2 from the blood. This reduces lactate formation and is protective against degenerative diseases. There's all kinds of studies where you look at people that live in high places versus people that are living down in the Mississippi Valley, right? And because of the differentiation in CO2 levels, you have a ton less degenerative diseases when you're living in the mountains. And people tend to live longer living higher as well, right? I don't know if mainstream attributes to CO2. I'm sure they don't, but I believe it to be CO2. The intrauterine environment, high CO2. Normal fetal life has low oxygen and high CO2. This high CO2 state reprograms cells epigenetically via methylation and acetylation of genes, removing accumulated age, stress effects, and preventing progressive gene silencing that causes aging and degenerative diseases. Could a lifelong environment mimicking intrauterine CO2, O2 levels avoid aging? I don't know. But babies in the womb, like they don't scar, right? They could get a wound and somehow they're able to regenerate it with no scar. Why is that? High CO2 levels, right? I think this might be my last example. During rapid eye movement sleep, breathing is inhibited and tissue CO2 rises. This high CO2, low oxygen state triggers multiplication of stem cells and mitochondria, the restorative phase of sleep, right? That's what's happening during REM sleep. Why are so many people on CPAPs? Okay, what's happening in your sleep that makes someone stop breathing? All right? The body's trying to increase the amount of CO2 in it. It's supposed to be a restorative, right, this time of sleep. But when you're having, the problems that your modern American person has, right, they're going a little too long on the not breathing part in their sleep, right? But this, right, inhibited breathing is by design, okay, to raise CO2 levels, to help heal the body.
So is the CPAP helping or hurting them?
It's an attempt, right? When the acute becomes chronic, you have issues, right? If I work out and I run out of oxygen because I've used it all up and I've used up all that energy, and then it starts to burn because I'm building up lactate, okay? That's good that my body continued to create energy, even though it's going to cost me something down the road, right? That's that -4 number, okay? My body went from oxidative metabolism, I'm working out, I'm feeling good, oh, now I feel the burn. My body is doing an emergency act and it's creating lactate, which is a problem, but my body can convert that back to glucose, okay? But the problem happens when we're doing that long term, right? We're creating lactate chronically. Same with this thing, right? You're sleeping and you have inhibited breathing in order to elevate CO2 by design. But if your body is just not working, the metabolism is not working, it knows it needs more CO2, right? By design, our bodies are intelligent. And then you stop, right? People will literally stop breathing. Why is that, you know? There's a lot of reasons that allopathic medicine gives, but in my opinion, it's to elevate CO2, but it's going from a acute situation or from a short-term thing to a long-term thing, and that's a problem, right? So it's the intelligent body's design to heal, but if it's getting attacked by too many things, right, it can't win, if that makes sense.
So it's good if your body, if a body, I don't have this problem, but
Uh-huh.
I know someone, a lot of people that do, and some
Mhm.
of them are like really fit, and I know from the gym. And
They have like air hunger, or what specifically? You're talking about like CPAP type stuff?
Yeah, and they're
Yeah,
on the-
sleep apnea, yeah.
So it's like,
Well, it's necessary for some people, right? To, these are the interventions that we accept as normal because we have such a suboptimal health as normal in America, right? So the CPAP is necessary. Like these people, they got to stay alive, right? But if they were to heal their metabolism, and if their body was producing enough CO2 by oxidative metabolism, then I believe, right, that they would not need the CPAP. Yeah. And so people do this inhibited breathing as an exercise on a regular basis, and we'll talk about it here in a second. This one's talking about glycation. A lot of people attribute glycation to sugar, which is not the case. You can have protein glycation as well. But it happens because of PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids. CO2 spontaneously forms carbamino bonds with protein amino groups inhibiting glycation. Okay? So, that's a whole rabbit hole. All right, so these are several of our electron carriers. I just wanted to put this up here for you guys to see. But we talk about NAD+, that's the empty cab, and then NADH, he's the guy with the electron. When you have inhibited oxidative metabolism, you have a whole bunch of full taxis, these guys on the right, and not a lot of empty taxis, those guys on the left. Okay? And that's a problem. You want a higher NAD+ to NADH ratio. That's when you're able to produce energy efficiently. Okay, so you might recognize some of these, like CoQ10, right? That's an electron carrier. If you guys have taken CoQ10 before, that can be helpful in restoring your metabolism. All right, so ways to increase CO2. So this is kind of like a stimulated.
so back to the CoQ10, is the ubiquinol the same type of?
Yeah.
I was told that if you're over a certain age, your body it's not gonna help if you take the CoQ10, and you should take the ubiquinol.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't know if the people, a lot of these things are just marketing tactics, right? So like I have, maybe it's cheaper for them to get ubiquinol versus CoQ10. I don't know. CoQ10 is expensive. I don't know if you've ever bought it before. It's stupid expensive. But ubiquinol is literally CoQ10, right? This is CoQ10. And it's just a matter of whether it's carrying an electron or whether it's not. And I think it carries 2 electrons. But I might be wrong on that. But anyway, it's called the oxidized and the reduced, right? This has been oxidized, meaning it's had its electron taken from it, essentially. We can think about it like that, right? He had an electron in there, and then something like oxygen, the terminal electron acceptor, receives that electron, and now he's ubiquinone, right? That is CoQ10. It's just whether it has an electron or not, essentially, is what it comes down to. So these are ways, and again, I'll just remind us, right? NAD plus, precursor, niacinamide. FAD, precursor, riboflavin, right? B2 and B3. All right, so how do you increase CO2 in your body if you have suboptimal CO2, right? The optimal situation, you heal your metabolism, you're able to complete oxidative metabolism, and you don't have things like PUFA inhibiting it. But how can we get ourselves out of this inflammation cycle so that we can heal? Sometimes it takes, right, things to get you out of these cycles. Buteyko breathing is kind of like what your body's doing at night to increase CO2, right? If you look up, has anyone done Buteyko breathing before? You've done it? Any particular reason?
No, I was just curious, and but it takes a long, long time to master it.
Yeah.
It's very hard.
Yep. Yeah.
But it can cure a lot of stuff naturally.
Yep.
I mean, really, it's
Yeah. People have asthma and they do Buteyko, and
practically everything.
yeah. Why can Buteyko breathing have such an effect on such a vast array of diseases? It's because the purpose of Buteyko breathing is to increase CO2 in the body. That is the purpose of it. Okay? And so a little exercise that I do is just regular breathing, breathe out. I plug my nose for 5 seconds, and then I continue regular breathing. Plug my nose for 5 seconds after, a little bit. After I breathe out again, plug my nose, 5 seconds, right? And you'll have this desire to take a big deep breath. And the part of learning to do Buteyko breathing is to suppress that urge to breathe, take that deep breath in so that you can elevate the CO2 in your body. Increase the acidity of your blood so you can release oxygen and actually oxygenate your body. All right, baking soda, like we talked about, that bicarbonate, metabolism, that's how our bodies create CO2. If you heal your metabolism, you will have all the CO2 you need. People actually do CO2 baths, okay? So we've been talking about, Jen and Michelle, you guys were talking about hyperbaric oxygen chambers. Obviously, you would not do a similar thing with CO2 because that would end very badly. But people will actually, and I'm not advising or suggesting anything, but they'll have a black trash bag and get into it and fill it up. CO2 is heavier than the air around you. And so it'll sit in there and they'll tie it up around them. And people see some incredible things from doing CO2 baths. People will plug their bathtub drain and using a CO2 tank, and it's not like you have to take your clothes off and get ready for a bath because it will go through your clothes or whatever. It's a gas, and they'll lay in their bath and fill it with CO2 and have some incredible benefits from that. Has anyone gone down the rabbit hole of nose breathing versus mouth breathing and all the effects of that, right? I tape my kid's mouth shut, right? That'll sound like abuse, but because they'll be healthier in the future, right? And so when they sleep, they're like, Dad, we're putting on our mouth tape, because it's so important for facial structure, everything. Incredibly important to do nose breathing. But one part of it is when you're breathing with your mouth open, all your CO2 is able to go out, okay? But you have nasal cavities that are able to retain CO2, and so you're able to elevate your CO2 levels when you nose breathe, right? This is the way we're supposed to breathe. And when people teach Buteyko breathing, it's always nose breathing, and it's always keep your mouth shut and tongue on the roof, right? Babies from when they're first born, when they are breastfeeding, right? Their tongues are on the roof of their mouth as they breastfeed, and it's pushing up against the palate and spreading it out and creating this big nasal cavity, a wide face, right? It's this indicator of health. But it's also so you have these chambers to hold CO2, larger nasal cavity. Any questions about some of these ways that you can increase CO2 in your body with? Yes, sir.
Baking sodas, are they just eating it straight, or is there a specific way?
Yeah.
Put it into water,
Yeah, like when I do it, I just do like a quarter of a teaspoon in water. So mix it up and slam it back. A lot of people that have like kidney issues will do baking soda, and there's different reasons for that. But okay, I have a small bit on how vitamin D is a part of that metabolic pathway. Do we have time? Okay. All right. So where does vitamin D come into play in the metabolism, since that's what we're talking about, right? Okay. Vitamin D, you can get it supplementally, right? Or you can get it from the sun, or you can get it via food, okay? But this is the basic pathway. Cholecalciferol, cholecalciferol, ergocalciferol is like D2, and I personally would not supplement D2. There's some questionable effects of that from some studies that I've read. More than happy to send you some information on that if you like. But I would only use cholecalciferol personally. They both have the same metabolic pathway though. Okay? In the liver, they're converted to what's called 25-hydroxy vitamin D. All right? And people call this stored vitamin D. All right? And these are just names, right? We'll talk about that in a minute though. Then it can be sent to the kidney to be converted to what's called calcitriol, which is 1,25-dihydroxy vitamin D. When you go into the doctor and you get your serum blood test, this is what they test for. The stuff that you create in your liver. Okay? Calcitriol, 25-hydroxy. Has anyone gotten their 25-hydroxy tested? And has anyone ever gotten 125-dihydroxy tested before? Yeah, most doctors don't even know that you can test for it, but you can. And it can be helpful to know that. They call it the active form because it has a lot of activity at the vitamin D receptor, okay? And there's a whole rabbit hole you can go down, the whole receptor theory, but we won't do that today. All right, so that's the metabolic pathway. Where does vitamin D come into play in the metabolism? Active is a bit of a misnomer. They are all agonists, right? The opposite of an antagonist. An agonist, they have activity at the VDR, vitamin D receptor. But calcitriol, which is the one at the end of the metabolic pathway, right? The 125, the one that doctors don't usually test for at the end of the metabolic pathway, can be 10 to 100 times more active than the storage form, okay? Storage form is still active at the VDR. Calcitriol does what we call the dirty work of PTH. Has anyone ever had their PTH tested? Parathyroid hormone. And this is one of, when I work with a client, one of the ones that I highly encourage them to get tested because it is one of the best and easiest markers of something bad's going on, okay? PTH. A lot of your stuff will be like up and down and up and down. It's like, oh, I got it tested at noon on this day, and then when I went that one time, it was at 9 a.m. And you know, your numbers can fluctuate for a lot of these different serum tests. And you can just be chasing a number and it not be helping, right? Because the serum test might not be helpful for that particular substance, right? Because it can fluctuate so much. PTH, not so much. Okay, when you have high PTH, you most certainly have high calcitriol, because again, it's doing the dirty work. Calcitriol, by activating the VDR and pushing bone cells, osteoblasts, cytes, clasts, which have mitochondria, so they should be able to do what? Mitochondrial respiration, oxidative metabolism, right? They should be able to do this. They push them into what? Glycolysis, causing them to start producing lactate. What does lactate do in the bone? When your osteoblast mitochondria starts producing lactate, it tells them, pull calcium from the bones and put it in the blood. We need to send this stuff somewhere, okay? Where does it end up? In your soft tissue, calcification, okay? When you have high PTH, you will have high calcitriol. And I have a friend who had her parathyroid out. You have 4 of them. I think she had like 1 or 2 out because her serum calcium was through the roof. Why was that? Because her PTH was through the roof. And allopathic medicine, I mean, this is an extremely dangerous situation, right? You do not want calcium through the roof and calcification through the roof, right? This is no good. But she had those out and she's fine now, right? They were overproducing PTH, and we can talk about different reasons why that might be happening, but she had them out and now she's fine. She was having some major issues. Okay, does that make sense though? That pathway. Okay, now why did I say, right? Why did it say we don't have to go to the kidney and produce this super active vitamin D analog? Okay, let's talk about it. If you have consistently high parathyroid hormone, this remains active and you're constantly moving calcium into the bloodstream and under the influence of lactic acid everywhere in the body. Again, it will get stuck in your tissues, calcification. Okay. There's a study that shows maximum PTH depression occurs once vitamin D levels exceed 40 nanograms per milliliter. Does anyone know what their vitamin D 25 hydroxy number was? You said you had yours tested. Do you mind sharing?
I remember it was higher than that.
So if it's, right, a little bit higher, what might that indicate? That it's not getting sent to the kidney and converted into calcitriol, the super active form, right? And so when you have this higher level, you have what we call PTH depression, right? It's helpful when you have more 25 hydroxy. It actually suppresses PTH, which then stops the conversion of this into the active form. Okay? I don't know if you guys have heard of Morley Robbins, but he's like a guy that's been huge into kind of like anti-vitamin D, because I believe he has a misunderstanding of vitamin D metabolism. But what we know is that if you have a lot of calcitriol, you have a lot of PTH, and you have calcification. And it's a big problem. Okay? All right, so cholecalciferol. Why the bad rap? Why does Morley Robbins and a whole bunch of people discourage people from taking cholecalciferol? Okay? Of course, there's the rat poison connection, right? That's kind of the easy one. They say, look, it's in rat poison. Let's look up who creates cholecalciferol. Look, it's the people that make the rat poison. Just because something is a poison at astronomical levels does not mean it's a poison at small levels, right? The cholecalciferol that kills rats, that's the same stuff in the supplements, yes. And if I were to take a bottle of cholecalciferol, a whole bottle, I would have huge problems. Just like I would have huge problems if I took a whole bottle of acetaminophen, right? Or aspirin, right? I would have huge problems. Same thing with cholecalciferol. So I think this argument kind of falls flat because, as you can see, 1 milligram equals 40,000 IUs, okay? I personally only take it during the winter, and I don't even ingest it. I put it on my neck, okay? The LD50 is recorded at about 40 milligrams per kilogram, all right? So again, I take about 1/8 of that, and look how much that is. That's 8 times, it's astronomically high, the amount that you would have to take. And LD50 means this is the amount that it would take to kill half of the rats in the study, right? Half of them would even survive taking that, if you can believe that. 112 million IUs? Yeah, not ever going to take that amount. Okay, so I think this falls flat because everything is a poison at some point, right? And the classic example people give is even water, right? I think this falls flat. Okay, people also talk about it being a secosteroid hormone, right? What is so bad about a hormone? This is true. Vitamin D is actually a hormone. What is the precursor of cholecalciferol? How do we create it in our skin? The sun hits us. What is it using? Lanosterol, cholesterol, right? cholesterol is the precursor for all of our steroid hormones, including pregnenolone, progesterone, eventually getting to the end of the pathway, right? Then we also have DHEA, but getting to the end of the pathway with estrogens, testosterones, DHTs, right? Just because vitamin D is a secosteroid hormone, that does not make it a bad thing, okay? Cholesterol is the precursor. All right, so is testosterone a bad thing? Do people supplement with that? Yeah. Progesterone? Yeah. Okay? There's good reasons to do it. Good context. Obviously, it'd be awesome if we could all exist with no supplements, no nothing, but we live in a toxic world. And we also live inside buildings a lot more than probably people in the past. So I'm not creating as much vitamin D as I should. I sit at a desk. So in the wintertime, I'm taking 5,000 IUs and I'm rubbing it on my neck because I don't want my vitamin D to go below a certain level, right? All right, so any questions about that hormone aspect? Any pushback on that?
Jared, why are
Yes?
you rubbing it on your neck instead of adjusting?
Because a lot of the time people will respond badly, and we'll get to that. People respond badly to taking things internally a lot of the time. Like even magnesium. I know so many people, I'm like, yeah, magnesium bisglycinate, take that. And they're like, I respond terribly. I'm like, you respond terribly to that? Like, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do, you know? Because it's just crazy that all these supplements, a lot of them cause more problems than they help because of the excipients, the contaminants, right? The degradation. These are the three reasons. And so just because you have a bad response to something doesn't mean it's bad. It means there's probably something bad in it, right? Maybe other than the thing that you're taking. So in order to avoid possible, even MCT oil, right? MCT oil can be very aggravating to the intestines, actually. And so a lot of these supplements are in MCT oil. And so that's why I rub it on my skin. And you're able to absorb a lot of vitamin D from topical applications. So.
So I heard that if you take vitamin K2, K7 with that, it keeps it from calcifying. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Yes, yeah. So that's a huge part of calcium metabolism, and I take MK4 actually. I think MK7 actually kind of builds up in the blood, and MK4 doesn't do that. And so I specifically take MK4 for that reason. So
What ratio do you take to the
I don't. Vitamin K2 has so many benefits. I take probably more than 99.9% of the world vitamin K2, MK4. I take a lot, and it's a quinone. So kind of like ubiquinone. I think it's a 1-ring or maybe a 2-ring quinone. But anyway, so many, like people think of vitamin K2 as just like calcium metabolism and clotting, right? But there are so many things, and you can look up studies of people taking high dose K2 and curing some amazing things. So I take a lot of K2. So I don't look at the exact ratio on those because I'm very conservative with D3 and not so conservative with K2. But
Do you take K2 and MK4?
K2, MK4, that's the type of K2. Yeah, it's,
Say it again?
yeah, vitamin K2 and the analog is MK4. That's the type of, you were talking about MK7 and I do the MK4, so. All right. And then here's the other big thing. And this is the same reason why people say to not eat carbohydrates, right? They say it's bad because there are other cofactors required. And they don't say it in that way, but that's the implication, right? For example, in vitamin 2 metabolism, magnesium is required, just like in oxidative metabolism. They call magnesium MAG-ATP, okay? Sorry, they call ATP MAG-ATP because magnesium is so integral in energy creation. So if you create more energy, guess what you're going to need more of? Magnesium, right? If you're getting a good amount of vitamin D, guess what you're going to need more of? Vitamin K2. Is that bad? No. You're just needing more. right? And if you're not able to get more, right, it could be bad. But that's what they say about intaking carbohydrates, right? They say for every molecule you eat of glucose, you're gonna need this many atoms of magnesium, right? Okay, but why is that? They talk about it in a negative way, in like a famine mindset, right? There's like two mindsets. It's like you're either living in an abundant mindset or in a famine mindset. There's another word I can't think of, but if you take in glucose and you're able to perform oxidative metabolism, there's a lot of cofactors, not just magnesium. We talked about B1, B2, B3. Very important to create energy. And if you increase your metabolism, you're going to need more of those. Is that a bad thing? It's not a bad thing. It's just the reality, right? If I have a business and I build 100 houses a year, I'm going to need a lot of workers, a lot of wood and metal and screws. Is that a bad thing? No, I have an amazing business. I'm building 100 houses. I'm providing an incredible, product to the market, etc. Right? It's not a bad thing. It's just the reality. Okay. So I think this one also falls flat as long as you're being intentional, listening to your body. Right? Everyone's different. We've lost the art of listening to our bodies. Right? We go to the doctor. I feel great, and they take a test, and they're like, "This number looks terrible, but I feel fantastic." They're like, "But we need to give you statins," and everyone's like, "All right, yeah, hit me up," and right? It makes no sense. We have to listen to our bodies. So
So you're talking about magnesium, but there's so many different kinds.
right, yeah,
What kind?
yeah. It's so whatever works for you, to be honest. I do a lot of topical stuff. So magnesium chloride, we buy a 10-pound bag of magnesium chloride flakes, and we're making magnesium chloride spray bottles, and we're spritzing each other left and right. So kiddos, they get a little magnesium chloride on the bottoms of their feet before bed and things like this. So, but yeah, we do that. I don't take a whole lot of oral magnesium. Most of it's topical. So, yeah, it's whatever works. It's so different for everyone. Everyone's so unique. And there's so many different products out there. It's like if you find one that works for you and gives you energy, right? That's a good thing. All right, so when the active vitamin D is high, we know there is inflammation. Okay, it's being converted to the end of that metabolic pathway. Taking cholecalciferol can lower calcitriol and PTH. It's kind of counterintuitive, right? You would think if I take the precursor, if I get a lot of the precursor, then I should get a lot of the end product, right? But you only convert it to calcitriol if there's inflammation, okay? And if you have enough of the stuff in the beginning of that metabolic pathway, then those vitamin D receptors are being activated, and your body's not going to think, oh, I need to super activate them. Does that make sense? By creating the calcitriol? Okay, it can increase the degradation and excretion of the active form, right, in quotes, because they are all active at the VDR. Another reason vitamin D can cause issues, right? In general, the potential for allergenic reactions, excipients, contaminants, all of this can cause issues. In supplements they're putting gums. Gums are probably the worst thing you can put in your body. That's like up there with carrageenan, right? Guar gum and locust bean gum and all these things. They really cause issues. And even MCT oil can cause issues. So a lot of companies are going to extra virgin olive oil as the carrier for these fat-soluble things like D3 because a whole lot less allergenic responses. But I'm finding out not the case. All right, so again, with the whole hormone thing, all right, this is a similar viewpoint with pregnenolone. It is considered an inactive hormone, right? This is what allopathy says. Pregnenolone, who's heard of pregnenolone before? Anyone? Yeah? So this is like the, they call it the mother sex hormone. Why is that? Because, well, it's created from cholesterol, but then all of our sex steroid hormones are created from pregnenolone, okay? They call it inactive, when in reality it can bind all of the steroid receptors. blocks the aldosterone receptor, it can block the estrogen alpha receptor, and it can even sustain a pregnancy if the body is not producing progesterone, which is very common nowadays. The body not producing progesterone. And the whole hormone topic is another rabbit hole. Okay. So, yeah, vitamin D is kind of a huge thing these days in the alternative health world, where a lot of people are very, they're being told it can be a bad thing. And everything is context, right? That's the biggest thing that I approach all my clients with is everything is context. Have you had your vitamin D tested? Do you even need it? Like, why would you take it if you don't need it, Are you out in the sun a lot? Like, when you go out in the sun at midday for 15 minutes, right, you're creating a lot of vitamin D, more than you can get in a supplement. Well, not more, but like the same amount, right, that you would get in a supplement. So why take the supplement if you can get the million more benefits, being in the sun? And obviously, sun can cause damage, right, if you're in it too long. So, it's all about the balance. So, but in the wintertime, I do vitamin D because I'm not getting it from the sun up here in Missouri. All right. Well, any questions? But yeah, I mean, obviously, it's always good to have data, but a lot of people chase numbers as well, and it can. I feel like I'm like a recovering orthorexic human. I don't know if you've heard that term before. Orthorexia is like, it's like a disorder of always thinking about, health, right? I can't eat that because I'm gonna die if I eat, I'm being dramatic, but anyway, it's good to have like that balance of figuring out what works for you. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Can I just comment a little bit?
Yes. Oh yeah. The solvents are always what gets you. Yeah. And people are like, "There's no excipients on here. Why am I having a bad response?" Probably a solvent. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a farm, so it's easier for me to get the amount of vitamin D. It's like very easy, because I'm out carrying waters or whatever, feed and wrestling sheep. So, but yeah. I mean, there's websites you can get on, like D-dimer, where you can look up the exact location you're at, the time of day, and you can see exactly how much time you need in the sun to get a specific number of IUs of vitamin D. So, but yeah, if you just look up vitamin D calculator or vitamin D at my location, lots of websites doing that. So.
Do you not do seed oils? Do you avoid them completely?
Yeah, well, and again, that's the thing. It's like all about balance. Like, yeah, we don't have seed oils in our house, and when I pass someone in the grocery store with a big old vegetable oil thing in their cart, I give them a side eye. But no, yeah, we try to avoid them as much as possible. So.
Because olive oil is probably healthy.
Yeah, but even olive oil. It's high in unsaturated fats, and so it's not optimal to use a lot of. Like coconut oil is an incredible fat, and like palm oil obviously has a bad rap because of what people are doing to the earth to extract it, but it is highly saturated fat. It's solid at room temp. That's kind of like the litmus test, I guess, if I can use that term. For a fat and how saturated it is, right? The more solid it is at room temp, the more saturated it is, which means the more stable it is, which means the less it'll inhibit oxidative metabolism. So we don't eat a lot of olive oil because it is a lot of unsaturated fats. So
Put the beef tallow.
yeah, so the amazing thing about cows and sheep, which is why they're the animals I have, is they can eat cellulose, right? They go and eat the salad that I don't want to eat, and because in reality, salad, like raw greens, we cannot digest cellulose, like we just can't, and that's what cows are for, and what sheep are for, and goats. We used to have goats, and I hate goats. Don't get goats. But But sheep and cows can take that and they can convert it into saturated fat, right? They are